So,
So this is off the top of my head.
Is off the top of your head.
It's just me saying, and I do remember that time period in my life very well.
It's whatever you want to say about it. All right. So, what do you remember about the Iran hostage situation? What were the attitudes and feelings towards what was going on? And do you remember how your family or community reacted?
Okay, go one at a time. Give me the first one again.
All right. What do you remember about the Iran hostage situation?
All right, so I was a junior in college.
Okay.
So I remember it becoming a major news story, and they would have a special show on after the news at night just for this specific incident. So they wouldn't even cover it that much in the news because they had a whole show just about the Iran hostage crisis.
That's how big it was.
Yeah, yeah. So at the time, there was a revolution in Iran,
Mm-hmm.
and a Western friendly or U.S. friendly prime minister was removed from office, and they put Ayatollah Khomeini in office, who was the supreme leader and a religious leader, and it turned Iran into a theocracy. So that was kind of against, American wants and needs. To understand that Iran was an oil producer too, so it was an area that was of great interest for the United States. The Shah of Iran was removed from office, and then they placed the Ayatollah in Ayatollah Khomeini in office, and they created a whole new government. The Shah was diagnosed with cancer. Now, this was a major anti-Shah movement, or he was way more secular. He was placed there by the oil companies, as well as Great Britain, as well as the United States. The CIA was involved to make him the leader of Iran, and then he lost his spot. Now, when he was diagnosed, he was in search of good medical care, and then we as in the United States, allowed him to come to New York City and go to a hospital, I think Sloan Kettering, but in a hospital that could deal with his cancer. And that led towards the Iranians being anti-American, chanting "Death to America," protesting against them. They attacked the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, and they took hostages. And they held hostages for 444 days.
So that's one thing I found interesting, was how long they held him for.
Yeah, so it was in the middle of the Carter presidency, was a major issue for the election of 1980, so that Ronald Reagan and the Republican Party were claiming that we weren't able to handle that situation, and that was a major voting issue of it was a time when the United States, coming out of the 1970s, we're dealing with a downturn in kind of national pride. I mean, the 1970s was Vietnam. The 1970s was Watergate. The 1970s was declining economy.
So it was just a bad time.
It was a bad time. No one was, as kind of, promoting, America first at this time, right?
So how would you describe the attitudes of people around you and just citizens at this time?
Well, because of those negatives, a lot of citizens or people around me, which would be college students, were apathetic. There wasn't any political opinions. There wasn't any major, everyone's trying to deal with an economy in decline. There was major inflation, mainly because of Iran and the creation of OPEC, which was the oil producing, exporting countries, right? They then were playing around with the price of oil and causing for inflation in the United States. And it was against the United States support for Israel. It was against the United States helping in establishing the presence of Israel because of the 10 Days War, as well as the Yom Kippur War. These are all things that made the Middle East, Iran one of them, turn against the United States. Yeah. So they then played around with and caused oil to jump through the roof, and it caused the oil crises, which was also like the United States we didn't feel that our government had control of the things we should have control over. Yeah.
Okay, so the people for the most part were angry at the government on both sides?
The people were angry at the government not having any control of on an international basis, and at this point, the focal point was we have no way of getting the hostages out. We have no. At one point, we tried with a helicopter unit, and halfway to getting to Tehran, the helicopters crashed, and like military were killed. So it was like we felt as if our government was very inept, and unable to control the situation. Yeah.
So I mean, obviously you're a social studies teacher now. Back then, do you remember how you felt about the situation?
In my own mentality, yeah. I mean, the Ayatollah was demonized in the United States, and there were, I'm in college, right?
Yeah.
So there were burn the Ayatollah in effigy, parties, and there were things that showed that popular opinion was against the Iranians. Yeah, yeah.
So just to go off of that, so clearly during 9/11, like where were you during 9/11?
I remember 9/11. Yeah, and we all do, like it was yesterday. Yeah, I was teaching here. Yeah.
You really? Oh, you were here?
I was teaching sophomores and juniors here in 2001.
Did like the school?
I had a young family. And yeah, it was a major deal. Yeah.
So
The day it happened.
Did you guys like turn I don't know. Did you have TVs? Like
We had 25-inch TVs in the corner of every room. Yeah, there was nothing like this. We had blackboards,
Mhm.
right? There was nothing that was this monstrosity of a screen in front of that. And yes, I would, as a history teacher that day, when every class came into my classroom, we had CNN on or ABC. I changed it sometimes. There wasn't really a Fox network then.
okay.
That was really promoting it, and I told my students to open their notebooks and journal while we watched what was happening, and keep those notebooks, because people are going to ask you someday, where were you? And on September 11th, 2001, and if you keep the notebooks, you'll be able to show them what you were thinking and what you were doing at the time. Yeah.
I'm sure reading some of those notebooks would be pretty cool.
I've had students that I see coming and going. Sometimes when I'm around, I see people that I had in class over that year. They say they still have their notebook. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. I wish. Well, obviously, I wish I was alive at that time, but I think it'd be interesting to like experience something like that.
Well, yeah. When there's what do we call it, national crises or calamities? Yeah. Even I think one of the purposes for a school is to kind of put it in its place and use it to allow for the students to learn as much as kind of just react. Don't react, just kind of absorb and understand and go from there. But yeah, that's interesting that you're connecting the hostage crisis with 9/11.
I was about to say. So, how would you describe the country like the following like weeks and months after 9/11?
They were. It led towards a bonding of citizens. I think it led towards an outpouring of nationalism. Initially, within months of it happening, I was very encouraged by the way the government, our president at the time, as well as Congress, handled it. In that we did not, within the weeks to a month or so, jump to conclusions and just lash out. Now, within a year, the Iraqi war doesn't happen until maybe over a year later. The Patriot Act doesn't happen for over a year later. All the reactions we had against terrorism, until we actually, realized what happened. Like, yes, do we think it was terrorist? As soon as that second plane hit, I think we all knew it was an attack on America. Nobody before that day knew what Al Qaeda was. If they tell you they did, then they're lying to you. right? They didn't know who Osama bin Laden was before that day. If they tell you they did, then they're lying to you, right? Because it was, for rank and file. Now, when you look, as I have done and read the 9/11 report, there were many people within the government that were aware of that threat and aware of what might happen, but never did anyone think that they were going to, hijack planes and
To that level,
fly them
it's
into.
crazy.
Yeah. It was every minute, as you went through the day, something worse would happen, and you say, "Wow, it can't get worse than this." And then within an hour, something worse happens. The plane, then the second plane, and then watching people try to escape the flames, jumping out of that was a horrible image, right? And then watching the buildings collapse, that was a horrible
It
image.
must be hard to watch.
And then knowing that they went after and they ran into the Pentagon, and it wasn't just one plane, that was a horrible image. Like it just, then when you hear the plane that went down in Shanksville, PA, and knowing that the people in the plane took over the cockpit or took over the plane and then caused it to crash, bringing on their own, it just got worse and worse and worse as the day went on. Yeah, and at the same time, I was a father of young children. They were not even teenagers yet, and I was a teacher here. And you had to try and make sense out of all of it. I did the day after distinctly say, if yesterday was the most terrifying day in American history, which at the time you could say, we didn't know the death count yet. I was thinking as many people died in those plane crashes as may have died in the whole Vietnam War. I mentioned that to one of my classes, but it turns out the number was much lower. But if that day was the most threatening day in American history, the day after, I feel we were the most secure, because all police, military, all government officials in charge of security were all on their A game, right? There was no planes were allowed to take off any airport anywhere for I think about 4 or 5 days, maybe longer, but I think it was about 4 or 5 days. All right, everyone was aware of who could or couldn't have been a suspected terrorist. There was the next day, even though when we were feeling we were most frightened, might have been the safest day in American history because, nobody can get across. Now understand that airport security was nowhere near what it is now. The 9/11 caused airport security and air traffic, the lines that caused that to jump.
Because it used to be super easy on a plane, right?
Yeah.
Just walk in.
Yeah, and everybody could go to the gate with you. People saying goodbye to you didn't have to drop you off. You could go in the airport with your family, and then they could stand there and then wave goodbye to you as you went into the plane. At that point, and that stopped right away.
They can't.
Yeah. Well, it changed America. Yeah.
So you said.
But I do think it made people. It brought people closer together as Americans.
United us together.
Yeah.
So would you say after 9/11, people were more united than with the hostage situation or crisis?
Well, there were other things that happened when Ronald Reagan was elected. It ended the hostage crisis, which is interesting. It seems as if people would, with a cynical mind, will think that, that the crisis could have been over before, but it wasn't because, it was a voting issue. Who would the Iranians want? There was a big question at the time. And then a number of other things started happening that made the United States start seeing itself more in a positive manner. Not the least of which, and it's hard to say, it's hard to make this, but that the movie The Miracle, right? So that year, in 1980, is when the American Olympic hockey team defeated the Russians in the Olympics. That almost turned things around as much as anything.
Really?
Yeah.
So you said this to come back. We said when the second plane hit the tower, that's how pretty much everyone knew that it was a terrorist attack. So after that, was there a sort of stereotype towards Middle Easterns?
Yes.
There was.
There was a suspicious. yeah. There were images of, you know, in the Middle East, there were images of the celebration, even if it wasn't the country that caused it, but, you know, the Islamic world, you know, you saw images that were used on television that showed people celebrating that it happened, you know. It's interesting because a alumnus of LaSalle, John Lehman, was a member of the 9/11 Commission that put the report together about what really happened. And in the midst of publishing the report, he came to LaSalle and talked to the father-son banquet. Yeah. He actually held an assembly in the auditorium, and they just released a 9/11 report, and he came and spoke about what was uncovered and what really happened on that day. Yeah. He said one of the mistakes of the American security system is no communication between the FBI, the CIA, and the DOJ, the Department of Justice. They were like against each other. But what I thought was very interesting is he distinguished the difference between the Islamic world and Islamists, right? So a small incremental part of all of Islam are Islamists, terrorists looking to attack the West and attack the United States. But the Muslim faith as a whole are not necessarily the Muslim faith as a whole and the Islamic world as a whole aren't all about attacking the West and attacking. So and he gave that number as like under 1% of all of the Islamic world
very, very, very small.
are Islamists. But at the same time, you know, I don't know if America was ready to believe that because we were the direct, you know, we were the direct, you know, we had to deal with the direct attack by at least Al-Qaeda, you know, which, you know, then we would very naturally think that, you know, it was an attack by Islam on, you know, the United States for numerous reasons. Yeah.
So to wrap this up, what is one thing you say would like finally came from both the hostage situation and 9/11 when it came to seeing the Middle East and how America would come from that, or would expand on that?
Yeah. So as a history teacher, all right. So the Middle East, just geographically, is the intersection of Africa, Europe, and Asia. The major cultures and influences across the board intersect there. It's not hard to understand. That is the most volatile part of the world, where all those, you can look at religion, you can look at government, you can look at the economy. The Suez Canal and oil is as important as anything. You know, you can look at politics, you can look at all the issues and think this is the area that you would pick as the most volatile spot. And it's very difficult to, you know, one reason, in one way you may, you know, make a point one way and or you be called out by the other side as being, you know, it's very easily, very simple, very much like now, when if you even soften your views towards the Palestinians, you could be accused of being anti-Semitic. If you even look at the view through the eyes of Israel, you can be accused of being Islamophobe. Like, no matter what way you lean, somebody's going to accuse you, and that's how I feel the Middle East is constantly. You know, it's so complicated, and as soon as you want to do one thing right for one side, the other side is going to accuse you of. As soon as you reach out on the other side, then you're going to get accused from the other. It's way above my pay grade, and it's difficult even for the smartest people in the world to try and manage and understand.
So you can't play both sides. You got to choose one and just deal with whatever.
There's no answer to that. Yeah, I agree, but it's as complicated. It's like playing 4-level chess. You know, like you have 4 boards and you're trying to play them all at the same time. There's so many different ingredients to try and figure out. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Fitz. I appreciate that.
Anytime, Jason. Appreciate it. Anything else?
Just got me.